Having a marketing background was a huge help to grow the name. A lot of people use it like, "Hola, Billi, ¿cómo estás, Billi?" As a teenager growing up in LA, did a little tagging with spray paint, opened a small gallery in the East Village. I had never done on-air design. My first experience in the art world, I was hooked. Recreated the on-air design for HBO. All of a sudden, New York Magazine came calling and wanted me to do a portrait of Michelle Obama.
That's the voice of Billi Kidd, talking about some of his objectives and accomplishments as a rising star in the world of street art, an underground movement that's gaining worldwide popularity thanks to well-known street artists like Mr. Brainwash, D-Face, Swoon, Shepard Fairey, and of course Banksy. Billi Kidd is the name Guido Rodriguez uses for his work as a street artist, sort of like a certain novelist and podcaster who uses the name Promo Cowboy as his Twitter handle. Both Billi Kidd and Barry Fitzsimmons have deep roots in television marketing, and both have other forms of expression they like to, well, I'll let Billi explain it.
I'm Billi Kidd, and that's my alter ego as an artist. Most of the work I generate is in New York City. I've been doing this for about 10 years, and after a long career in advertising, let's say 20 plus years, I hit a period in my life where I just felt burnt out. I felt creativity was sort of escaping me, and I wanted to do something about it. I couldn't afford a Porsche and drive 160 miles an hour on the highway, so street art was the next best thing. It allowed me to go out, be creative, and explore my inner demons.
I'm Barry Fitzsimmons. In this edition of the Promo Cowboys podcast, we talk TV marketing and branding as usual, and how to face our inner demons, and maybe even chase those demons down the New York City streets. Can you first just define street art?
Street art has been around forever. Ever since the caveman put a hand on his wall and blew paint from his mouth onto that wall to leave a print, that's what street art is. It's the desire to leave a mark in the world, to piss on the wall and let people know that you're here.
But what's the difference between street art and graffiti?
Now you get into the nuance. Graffiti was, again, it was pissing on the wall. It was basically started out as putting your name, tagging your name all over the city, getting a little bit of fame by putting your name out. And it evolved into these large murals, which then evolved into these large, very creative and articulate pieces of art. And then street art sort of evolved from that graffiti genre. And there's a lot of hate between the traditional graffiti artists and what are now termed street artists, because one might say that street artists probably come from a more educated background, and street art was more about sort of wild posting. It was about creating art that you could repaste numerous times all over the world, as opposed to creating a single mural that might be somewhere in Brooklyn or in the Bronx or in Manhattan. A third offshoot of that street art genre is the sticker world. Political stickers, bumper stickers, kid stickers for your notebooks and so forth. But it also evolved from street art as far as the art genre, and stickers are an easy way to trade with kids from all over the world, artists from all over the world, and get your work up in multiple countries simultaneously.
Let's say you're a New Yorker walking down the street downtown, or you're not a New Yorker, maybe from out of town. Say you're in the East Village or over in Alphabet City. Give me an example of the kind of street art that they may see that would be different from a piece of graffiti.
Obviously, the scale. I mean, graffiti in the traditional spray can sense tends to be large murals, where street art tends to be on doors, on stop signs, stickers, on posts, on mailboxes. And it's a reproducible image. That's the big difference, where a single graffiti wall might be a one-off piece.
A street art piece is likely from a stencil then, or...
It could be a photograph. It could be a Xerox. It could be markers that a lot of sort of sticker artists do tags with markers on sticker paper or post office slips and paste them all over the city. So, I mean, the basic difference is that the idea is multiples as opposed to single.
And I think, my interpretation is that there's more of a finer message to street art, a more interpretive message perhaps, and a more you sort of mentioned it before, more educated. I hate using that word, but perhaps higher thinking required to fully get a piece of street art versus a piece of graffiti, which is often, interpreted as fuck you or I'm the coolest, or, it's more about awareness, I think.
I think so. I think, and again, I wouldn't use the word educated because a lot of street artists are self-taught. So it's not necessarily school. Certainly there's street artists out there, trying to, pursue a message, whether it's political or self-interest. But I think they understand that it's marketability, and that's a big difference where, I think the old school graffiti artists were more about, developing their craft, and the ones that had stuck around and actually evolved into incredible artists, developed this sense of craft and aptitude in what we call can control, where that's where they get their sort of essence and their fame and their exposure is where I think street artists are, at least in the beginning, are more about getting the message out and getting a point of view, and the craft perhaps is secondary to that. Certainly, there are a lot of street artists that are very evolved, and you talk about someone like Shepard Fairey, who was a printmaker and now is a fine artist. He was the original guerrilla marketer. Some people use it as a fame vehicle, and others use it as a way to get their work out into the world.
Would Keith Haring fall into the category of street artist?
He's more of the graffiti artist, but trending towards street art. I mean, he was doing a lot of the stuff was hand done, but certainly he comes from the graffiti world as does someone like Basquiat. Certainly was a graffiti artist, and again, Basquiat was out there pissing on the wall, and so was Keith Haring, just doing their thing. But again, their evolution and their craft and their singularity made them who they are.
More of my conversation with Billi Kid in a moment, but first, who likes a little bourbon now and again? I'm partial these days to Bullet, Buffalo Trace, 1721, and now and again, old Jack Daniels. By the way, this edition of Promo Cowboys podcast is brought to you by, bourbon, and beer, and bar pretzels, and by Promo Cowboy, a TV industry crime novel by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons. Available at your finer bookstores and at Amazon.com, and find the ebook at the Amazon Kindle store. Now, I want to clarify that Billi Kid is known to family and friends as Guido Rodriguez. Actually, it's pronounced Guido. Guido Rodriguez. Perhaps I've lived a sheltered life, but I've known only two people named Guido or Guido, and neither of them pronounced it Guido. So what's in the name? Billi Kid sets it straight.
In some Latin American countries, Italy and Europe, Billi, the way I spell it, Billi, literally means kid. A lot of people use it like, "Hola Billi, ¿cómo estás Billi?" Like, "How are you, kid?" So it's like saying kid. So in a sense, it's a pun on that, kid, Billi Kid. But also, as a marketer, I knew that the similarity of that name to Billy the Kid, there's already a connotation or an essence of that word out in the world. So it would be easy to remember. So there, it was sort of a play on that. Being a kid, as an artist, I feel like I'm a kid at heart. So I created Kid, or in this case, Billi Kid.
Oh yeah, and I think it really works well, and I think your sort of interpretive spelling with the I instead of the Y singularizes it. And when we look at your art, there's a singularity to the work. You can see a piece that you've done and say that's Billi Kid. I don't need to see your signature to know it's yours.
Did you ever hear the history of Frank and Jesse James and the four younger boys?
The name works, but it's what you do with it that really counts.
having a marketing background certainly was a huge help in how to quickly grow the name. Obviously, I didn't have the history. I mean, as a teenager growing up in LA, maybe I did a little tagging with markers, some spray paint, but never took it seriously. But now, it's sort of defining myself as a street artist. How do I get my work out? And again, in a very cluttered world, and break through that clutter and get fame, if you will. And as a marketer, one is make sure that my work has my name on it, and then two, separate my work from all the other works out there so that it cuts through that clutter. So it was a very deliberate sort of approach as opposed to a core sort of craft. The reason I mention it is because it's very important how I evolved. First I go out and I see what's out there, and then I find out who these other people are who playing this game, and love their work and how to evolve from that. And at first there was a lot of pushback with a lot of other artists and a lot of sort of beef, if you will, punching at each other socially and whatnot. So rather than combat that and come out and be aggressive and I'm going to put my stuff over yours, or I'm going to beat you, or I'm better than you are, and all that, I want to collaborate with people. Again, I want to have a positive message. So as a marketing guy, I came up with this idea of, rather than fight the system, the street art system, why not have them join me? And so I created artwork where other artists can participate in my art. And in one case in point is my pink Cadillac. So at first I was putting this pink Cadillac in the world with very 50s illustration, literally, based on a photograph that I from the 50s of a child riding one of those sort of aluminum or metal cars with pedals, and it looked like a Cadillac, but I made it pink. And at first, the only social media that we were using at the time was Flickr, which is a beautiful photographic social medium. And so at first, people were sort of giving me beef, and rather than fight back, I started meeting some of the other street artists and saying, "Hey, why don't you ride my pink caddy? Why don't you get behind the wheel?" So I took my character out and put their characters in the car, and that sort of that really took off. So all of a sudden, where people were trying to compete with me, people now are calling me to say, "Hey, let me ride your pink caddy." So that sort of became one of my early street art pieces. And again, it's a multiple. Even though there's different people riding the car, it's that same image coming out into the world. So repetition is very important in advertising, as we all know. So that was one way. The other way was the sticker culture. So rather than just collect or trade stickers with other people from around the world, I would take stickers that I collected and then put them in New York with very iconic New York backdrops: the Empire State Building, the Brooklyn Bridge, everything that you imagine in New York, and then putting that online. And so all these other people wanted to be part of that. Like, everybody wants to come to New York. Everybody wants their work in New York. It's the mecca of graffiti.
And a lot of your works are collages of stickers and then a central piece on top of that.
Correct. People were sending me tons of stickers and wanted to, sort of collaborate with Billi Kid. At one point, I was the sticker king. This is before Facebook and Instagram, and this is all via Flickr, one of the early sort of social mediums. So it was too complicated to go out and just put one sticker and document that. It was easier to take multiple stickers. And then in the beginning, I would go out and literally spend hours putting one sticker after another in the same location, photographing that. So all of a sudden, there's 50 artists represented in a single image. So my images were being swiped from my Flickr and then sort of shared. Now we call it sharing, but people would take my image because their sticker is on it, and then put it on their Flickr stream, and then all of a sudden my singular image was multiplied hundreds of times, and then therefore people find out who Billi Kid is. And again, it was a little bit deliberate. Certainly I didn't think it was going to take off the way it did. But I love sticker culture. I have a passion for it. And once I evolved into gallery pieces, if you will, and into indoor art, then I started using that sticker as a sort of collage background for my other artworks.
Tell me a little bit about one of your most notable pieces, the Michelle Obama portrait.
I love the game of politics. I'm not a sports guy. I don't watch sports, but I religiously watch, politics. And I was very sort of captured, like a lot of people were with the Obama campaign. And even, before Shepard Fairey and did the poster that we all know now as the campaign poster,
This is the Barack Obama Hope poster you're
the
talking
Hope
about.
poster, yeah.
This is back in 2007, I guess, or 2008.
Yeah. So before that became the it poster for the Obama campaign. I was out there using street art as a way to engage the conversation, and I started doing political work. So it was the end of the Bush administration, and I started doing these large scale cowboys, all the different cabinet members of his administration. And I just wanted to, continue the conversation. So I came up with this concept where I call it the end. The Bush administration was at the end of its line. So it had a double meaning. Is it the end of the world? Is it the end of the administration? Or is it a new beginning? So that sort of kind of caught fire. And a lot of the images ended up in blogs everywhere, and then all of a sudden, New York Magazine came calling and said, hey, we love what you're doing in this sort of grassroots art political world, and they wanted me to do a portrait of Michelle Obama.
What was that piece called?
They had seen the piece. It's an Obama collage that I put on the street, and it's a sticker collage with an image of Obama, not my own, by another artist. But at the time, it was the December issue, Man of the Year, and Barack Obama was the Man of the Year. And there was a big section in the magazine that chronicled the grassroots movement, the arts grassroots movement, how Obama had inspired all these artists from all over the world to create images of him. And I was fortunate to have one of my pieces selected, and it was one of my collage pieces with stickers. So when I started speaking to New York Magazine about the Michelle portrait, I had mentioned what stickers mean to me, and what I think it meant to the Obama campaign. There was a lot of talk about our shrinking world, and how now through social media, the internet, and through globalization, the world is ever so smaller than it was in the past, and we're able to communicate and collaborate with people via the internet. And I think that's what sticker culture did. It allowed me to trade and communicate with people in China and Brazil and Chile and Germany. And so again, the world becomes smaller, and we're able to talk to one another, which I think is a good thing. And a collage of these stickers from people represented from all walks of life, from all over the world, really became a wonderful backdrop for what the Obama campaign stood for. And it became the backdrop, obviously, for the Michelle Obama portrait.
So when we look at that portrait, what do we see?
Well, central, it's all stickers. And the central sticker is a large sticker of Michelle Obama, which is a portrait I illustrated. And then I printed a mega sticker, a large sticker. The piece is the original piece was ultimately 36 inches by 48 inches. But surrounding her, there's probably about 250 to 300 stickers that I collected from artists from all over the world. So it becomes a representation of that globalization in arts in this case. But there was this optimism, there was that hope message, and people from all over the world were sort of enamored with that. So I think that this collage represented that, the idea of a unified world.
And your motif for this particular piece that you've used in a few pieces is really quite perfect, because it's very, very poppy. It's kind of Andy Warhol-ish, posterized. It's, I think, based on a photograph, if I'm not wrong, but it's very two-dimensional.
That's sort of like my first legal piece, if you will, as opposed to appropriating images that I find on the internet and whatnot. One of the things that always becomes trouble for artists is appropriation. And so, in discussions with New York Magazine, they had the rights to an image of Michelle Obama that became what I referenced. But obviously, you make it your own. So I've been developing. It's early in my street art career, but my work was evolving. My technique was evolving. and the image of her is beautiful. So the photograph, that is, and it was easy to sort of take that image and make it my own.
You said something along the lines that you're not necessarily taking a stand, but you're really just interested in furthering discussion. And I appreciate that, because I think, discussion is certainly more needed right now than taking a firm stance.
There's a lot of politics in street art. And actually, if you look at graffiti and street art globally, it's all about politics, because especially in third world countries, it's you can have your head chopped, if you will, for doing graffiti. But so a lot of anti, corruption, anti-current administration graffiti is out there, and it's very dangerous for a lot of folks. And even in this country, when we get into politics, you see the graffiti, and it's you always demonize the other. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want people to walk away thinking like, oh, this guy's an obvious, lefty, tree hugger or anything like that. I just wanted to put out images that engage people and sort of, kept the conversation going. It's easy to demonize. It's easy to say, to make people the other. But I have confidence in democracy, and I have confidence that democracy seems to work. Keyword seems. And I have confidence whether my guy or gal wins or loses, I think it's going to be all right. And my thing is go out and vote.
My problem is that I don't have any candidates I want to support on either side or any side. And so when I go out and vote, I'm like, I'm still going to complain whoever wins.
It's the lesser of two evils. That's how Americans vote.
So your faith in the system is laudable, and I think it may have something to do with your background. You were not born in the United States. Talk to me about where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia, South America, and my parents are divorced. I came to the States when I was 9 years old. My mother had family in California, and we moved out there and grew up in first sort of a very Latino kind of neighborhood. We first lived in Echo Park, which is it's a very Latin quarter of LA, and I saw that world, as a Latino, not speaking English, learning the language, assimilating and trying to fit in, and how difficult it was when you're living in a sort of minority community and where schools really don't engage you. My first junior high school experience was at King Junior High School, and it was sort of the crossroads for a lot of Compton kids. There was the Crips, the Bloods, a lot of Mexican gangs, 18th Street, Familia, and as a kid trying to navigate these waters, you're trying to stay away from all these danger zones. Of course, I'm going to date myself, but this is all before the Uzis and the guns. This was still a bat and chain and switchblade world. So it wasn't as dangerous as it is today, with drive-bys and just guns everywhere. But still, I knew enough to not, get myself tangled in that world. But I tell you, if I didn't move away from those communities, I probably would have ended up in a Mexican gang or a Latin sort of based gang, and as just a survival.
Sure, yeah.
From there, my mom and I moved to a more Caucasian neighborhood, to Igorok, which is between Pasadena and Glendale. Some of my mom's family members had moved there. So I kind of, saw both worlds, whether it's the, Latino gang kind of culture, and then the sort of surf kid culture. And at Igorok High School was a really great high school. So, that was a great benefit. And that's sort of what led to me getting into college and me sort of pursuing the arts. I had some wonderful teachers, great experiences there that sort of held my hand through the process and kind of encouraged me to follow a career in arts and grants and scholarships and all that. Were I was a beneficiary of those of the system.
Go to sleep, little baby. When you wake, you shall have all the pretty little horses.
You grew up and had great teachers who supported you, and then you went from LA, I think, to New York. But tell me about the the transition you made from being a high school kid in LA to being a design student in New York?
Well, I had a 2-year scholarship to a school in LA, which is it's called the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, and it's pretty much like FIT is in New York. And once I earned my associate's degree, I wanted to pursue a career in advertising and design. And I started looking into Otis Parsons, which is in LA. And the opportunity came, they accepted me, and the opportunity came that I can come to New York and go to Parsons, New York. And my intention was just to, get my degree in design and marketing and move back to LA. But once I landed here, I felt at home. I felt, for the first time in my life, I felt comfortable being who I was, Latino, bilingual, because it's such a diverse community here, and you're constantly elbowing everyone in every aspect of life, and that doesn't happen in LA. You're in a cocoon in LA, and you're in your bubble. You never leave your bubble. At Parsons, during the sort of like nightclub era of New York. I would be in clubs and sitting next to Andy Warhol and whatnot. It's crazy. That just doesn't happen anywhere else.
You come to New York, you go to Parsons, you study, and you graduate with some sort of a design degree.
Correct.
Tell me what you did after that.
Right from the get-go, a good friend of mine and I opened a small gallery in the East Village. We illegally lived there at the same time, so we just said to ourselves, rather than share an apartment, let's share a storefront, and we'll pull out cots at night and sleep in the back. And we did that for a little bit over 4 years. It was a sort of very danky, storefront that we put a lot of muscle into and fixed up and made look like a jewel. The East Village was sort of transitioning. It was up and coming. It's
tell me where that what the address was, or where the cross streets were.
It's on 5th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue.
Do you know what's there now?
The space is there now. Now it's actually a pet hospital. It was great because we were designing our own furniture. I was working full time at the time. I was working at Details magazine, which was this is before it was the men's magazine. It was a very downtown kind of magazine. So I would do that during the day, and in the evenings I would work at the gallery. On the weekends, working at a magazine, I kind of knew the ins and outs of how to get your work published. I quickly realized that every month there's a big panic attack because there's 150 empty pages, and they need eye candy to fill those pages. They need good words to fill those pages. And one of the easier ways back then, at least, to get your work published was to create beautiful eye candy. And I had the benefit of dating this girl that was a photographer and worked with an incredible photographer, had access to a mind-boggling studio. And we brought our furniture there, once a month and photographed it and created these gorgeous photographs that we then sent to all the different magazines and publications. And we got our stuff published everywhere. All of a sudden, we were like the celebrity young designers doing art furniture. We were in Metropolis. We were in El Decor. Being young, everybody loves you, and so it was my first experience in the art world, and I fell in love with it.
Billi Kid's East Village studio gallery was called Full Scale at 211 East 5th Street. It operated from 1987 to 1991. Okay, so you're doing a lot of very interesting artistic stuff that is involving physical objects and the design of furniture and stuff.
Sure.
You're also in the magazine business. But then somehow from there you transitioned, you ended up at HBO.
If you're a designer and you're in marketing, most likely you want to be in fashion or you want to be in entertainment, because that's where the fun, creative, innovative, forward-thinking work comes from. Everyone follows. So I had, working in a magazine, I was doing some fashion, some editorial work, which was really fun, working with photographers, working with models, stylists, a lot of creative folk. And then I met someone that had created HBO en Español with HBO, and I thought, oh my God, I'd love to work for this company. And he got my foot in the door. I was hired, and before I knew it, I was designing movie posters for HBO. I had access to, the best talent, and it created some iconic images for the company.
So, this kid from East LA, by way of Columbia, finds himself in the East Village among the elite pop artists of the late 20th century, then lands a job at HBO that most of us would kill for. Really, it's a great American story, combining hard work, talent, gumption, luck. Horatio Alger would approve. I asked Billi Kid, then known as Guido Rodriguez, about the process of creating some of his first works for home box office.
The marketing department has a movie that they want to create a key art for, and so they have 3 or 4 different agencies working on that, as well as their in-house department. And so I was competing against some really big boys. But when I started working at HBO, most of the other art directors that were there at the time had been there since the inception of the company, didn't know technology, weren't really versed at all the new things that were happening. So I immediately came in and sort of turned things upside down in that print world where I was creating some very risque images. I had come from fashion, so I knew how to take a concept from the paper to a final product. And I kind of tweaked the system a little bit where I wanted to work with the photographer. I wanted to hire a photographer. I wanted to create my own image and not just take images that were given to me by the film department to use as key art. And so I kind of fought those battles and won.
There goes that train, red, blue light behind.
One of my first major battles was with a movie called The Late Shift, which chronicled the battle between Jay Leno and David Letterman. So it was a really, really interesting movie. David Letterman was supposed to get the Tonight Show from Johnny Carson, but as we know, Jay Leno won that. And from the get-go, we were told not to use images of the talent because who looks like Jay Leno? I mean, the guy has a huge chin, and David Letterman with his tooth gap, and these guys are literally like cartoon characters. And so they said use illustration. Of course, all the other agencies that I was competing with were hiring these monster illustrators to do renditions of Jay Leno and David Letterman. One agency hired Hirschfeld, the line illustrator, to do a beautiful rendition of the two. And I did the opposite. I'm a rebel. I'm a street artist. So what I did is I'm gonna photograph the talent. So at the time, the creative director that I worked with gave me the green light to sort of pull the talent behind the scenes when they were shooting a spot with them and photographed them. But I photographed them like cartoon characters. And
So how did you cartoonize them? Was that something done in post, or did you shoot them?
I shot them in with a fisheye. And I was shooting them overhead so that their heads would be, blown out of proportion in relationship to their body. I literally took and made cartoon characters out of cartoon characters, and they looked like Jay Leno and David Letterman. But best of all, it captured the story.
So you got the two talent who play Leno and Letterman into the studio together, and you basically took 100 photographs. You got them in character, and that's the process.
That's the process. So I shot them individually. I mean, I was fortunate in that the creative director, Marilyn McAleer, she was shooting a spot, and she said, okay, I'm going to give you $5,000. That was the budget. Hire a photographer, and in between takes, shoot them and show me what you have. We had literally minutes with these guys, but they were already in costume. They had, the prostheses on and everything. So I photographed them and captured the likenesses that we were looking for. And having worked at a small agency, I was hands-on everything. So I literally did all the retouching on the original image and sort of created this image that was what ended up the key art. I mean, it was again, as I said, there was already key art that was allocated for this movie. But when marketing saw my image, the term from Maryland was they literally fell off the chair, and that became the poster. It was quite an experience.
Side note, at the time, my uncle, Rod Perth, was the executive in charge of late-night programming for CBS. he was portrayed in the HBO film Late Shift by Mr. Ed Begley Jr. We'll hear more from Billy Kidd about his exploits at HBO and elsewhere in a moment. Right now it's time for Getting Fired in America. Stories of, well, losing your job. Today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to read a selection from Promo Cowboy. Not where he gets fired necessarily. We find Promo Cowboy questioning his decision to accept a creative director position. He's a cowboy after all. It ain't yet 10 o'clock once Belinda and me get in that elevator at Times Square Video. Been a step behind her since we left her office at TV station. Them darn high heels must give a woman extra speed on the base paths. Of course, she's been talking the whole way up the square, sometimes on her pocket phone and sometimes over her shoulder to me. Guess I ain't been listening too hard either way. Riding next to her in that too slow, too small, too quiet elevator car, an awful familiar sensation comes over me. A heaviness I ain't felt in a long time, like I'm down the wrong trail, almost too far to turn round, and I'm only now coming to my senses over it. Wish I could just plain bolt, like I done so many times in younger days, times I felt that same heaviness. I make a smile, standing with my back to Belinda, thinking on years past when some small market promo director disrespect me 6 ways and tell me one last time to stay late without no overtime pay or not give me a chance to get my lunch for a whole month on account of the workload so heavy, or yell at me in front of the entire newsroom over some small thing wasn't even my fault, and then tell me to pack a box and leave if I don't like it. How I'd wait for all the suits to go home for the night, the techies too, then I'd pack a box and leave all right. Only, forehand, I'd dub off a little FU and switch out the regular scheduled promo on the next day's morning show. Instead of that same old image spot, that station had run 10 seconds of my middle finger under the title camera, or my big old hairy man parts, or a pile of something brown and steamy laying next to my hat. Thinking all that makes me laugh out loud. Sure am glad I got my backside to Belinda. That door opens and she gives me a look like I'm crazy, mouthing the words, "Stop it." We step on out. Old Times Square Video. It's like coming home. Now, more of my conversation with Billy Kidd. So, you have a few other successes at HBO that I love the stories for, like the Marilyn Monroe poster.
Well, after the Late Shift, I think I finally, or at least I had made my mark within, the agency or the marketing department, and so they started giving me more projects, and again, all in competition with BBD&O and the Steinegers of the world and all that, and again, we had the challenge of creating an image that captured this new movie, which was Norma Jean and Marilyn, which chronicled, the before and after of, the transition between Norma Jean into Marilyn Monroe. And everybody was doing the typical thing, Marilyn with, the skirt being blown up, all the iconic images that you see of Marilyn was exactly what the agency came back with. And I did a lot of study, I did a lot of research. And I found this image of Marilyn Monroe on this chair looking back at the camera. She had her back toward the camera, but she turned around. And it was just, I had never seen that image before. And it just struck me. And I thought, wow, what if we have this image, but in front of that is the mirror, the makeup mirror, and opposite of her is Norma Jean. So it was an image that, Norma Jean looking at herself as Marilyn Monroe. And of course, we had 2 huge talents. We had Mira Sorvino as Marilyn, and we had Ashley Judd as Norma Jean. And being a furniture designer, I also had the benefit of designing the chairs for the set. And I hired Dewey Nix, who is a giant in fashion photographer.
Like Betty had a baby, bam-ba-lam, like Betty had a baby.
So you did start to do some television design as well, if I'm not wrong, at HBO.
That's true. So I was, when they merged the departments, this is the age of synergy. Oh my God, everything has to be synergy. So, and all of a sudden we have on air and we have print, two separate departments. So, someone in marketing came up with a brilliant plan to merge the departments so that key art and on air promo look the same and speak the same and so forth and so on. So, all these creative teams were put together. And I ended up with Marilyn McAleer, which was great because she was doing all the fun, she was doing the movie posters and Sex and the City and The Sopranos and, all the sort of top-notch programming there. So perfect. And then, once synergy was no longer the buzzword, the departments were separated and I stayed on air and it was a great experience. I had never done on-air design and had a lot to learn. But
and were you working chiefly in the Adobe platform and After Effects, that kind of thing?
Yes, I worked in After Effects, and I eagerly embraced it and did some of my own design and some of my own production. But at the time, people were still using the old machines. And
what were you on? Hal and Henry?
Yeah, both. And worked with all the major, sort of 3-ring circus and Z and, a lot of 3D work and whatnot. And once the departments were separated, I ended up with Mark Rosenberg, and he was in charge of redesign. So all of a sudden, I'm in this new position as a broadcast designer, a senior broadcast designer, in working with a department that literally recreated the on-air design for HBO.
You did end up leaving HBO as a broadcast designer.
I left HBO and was hired as design director for Beantown East. And Beantown is a promo house that does a lot of promotions for syndicated programming. And so I was working in the East Coast office and designing all kinds of programs from The Simpsons, reruns to Judge Judy to anything and everything that came our way.
So they were a promo mill working in syndication for various shows. You stayed with them for a couple of years.
Yeah, for 3 years. And the good thing there was that because it's such a small house, everything was hands-on. So that's where I really got versed in After Effects and was creating a lot of the design work myself.
Okay, we're going to stop here and plan to hear from Billi Kid again in a future edition of the Promo Cowboys podcast, including the story of his move into designer apparel and how he's blending his street art in the sporting world, thanks to a partnership with the NBA and a program called The Art of Basketball.
The Art of Basketball was the first time that the NBA had fine art as part of their licensing program. So we decided that, why don't we get a player to actually become the artist? And we hired Dwayne Wade, put him on the court, and gave him buckets of paint and basketballs, and he went Jackson Pollock all over the court.
I'd like to thank my guest today, Billi Kid. I also want to thank freesound.org and the Pond 5 Public Domain Project for providing the music you heard on this Promo Cowboys podcast. The Promo Cowboys podcast theme music is by Four Barrel Carb. You're hearing it now in the background, and I like how sort of Led Zeppelish it sounds. As usual, this edition of Promo Cowboys has been brought to you by bourbon, beer, and bar pretzels, and by the novel Promo Cowboy, a TV industry thriller by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons, available at Amazon.com and your finer bookstores. Thanks for joining me. This is Barry Fitzsimmons, aka Promo Cowboy. I'm interested in your feedback. Reach out to me on Twitter at Promo Cowboy, also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Barry Fitzsimmons. Thanks to Patrick Fitzsimmons for creating the Promo Cowboys podcast artwork. By the way, that image is an homage to a Hollywood classic from the 1950s. The first 5 listeners to private message me the correct title of that film get a free copy of Promo Cowboy. I'll even sign it if you want. Promo Cowboys is a Steve production. Steve is a division of Igloo Media, LLC. This podcast was produced by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons. Thanks again for joining us. As Promo Cowboy says, shoot, didn't think it'd bleed so much. Take us out.